Right, so hello everybody. My name's Ollie. I'm the Policy and Campaigns Lead at Global Action Plan, and very excitingly here today to talk about a very new and exciting book, and more excitingly that, joined by the author of that book. And the author is Bob Wigley. Bob, would you like to introduce yourself?
Very briefly, yes. Chairman of UK Finance, and I spend most of my time backing youngsters in cutting-edge technology businesses.
Great. Thank you so much for coming to chat to us and talking about your excellent book, which we will get onto in a second. But we're also joined by two young people. Emer, do you want to say hello first?
Yeah, so I'm Emer, I'm 17, and I am an ambassador for Global Action Plan and also for Ulster Wildlife. And then I run a local community group to support the local environment and get people more informed on the climate crisis.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us, Emer. And Alex.
Hi, I'm Alex. I'm also a Global Action Plan ambassador, and I'm also part of Speak. Yeah.
Lovely. Well, really looking forward to this conversation, and it comes as part of well, all sorts of things developing in a world of tech and children's experiences online. And for Global Action Plan's parts, we are in the middle of a new campaign called Stop Targeted Advertising to Kids, and have published some things about that, and are looking to influence some upcoming bits of UK legislation relating to children's experiences online. So that's why we've got skin in this game, if you like. So just to start with, Bob, you have had and continue to have a varied and highly impressive and amazing career in finance and advising governments on all things economics and finance. So why of all the things that you could have written a book about, did you write a book about tech and Gen Z?
It's a really interesting question. I think partly watching my own 3 adolescent children going through their relationship with technology and watching how it affected the development of their personalities and how they see the world. And then 2 years ago, I adopted a New Year's resolution to try and meet a new Generation Z entrepreneur every business day. I've now met about 200. And it was really those conversations that kind of crystallized my view that Generation Z is so different from my generation when it comes to its relationship with technology that it was something worth trying to put down on paper.
And what did you discover when you were talking to those 200 entrepreneurs?
So I guess the key thing is that for you and I, well, certainly for me, I had a part of my life where technology, the kind of technologies that are now ubiquitous in our lives when it comes to entertainment, education, connectedness, weren't there. So we developed our personalities in the offline world. Most of Generation Z has never known a time when Google didn't exist. They use these technologies between 9 and 11 hours a day, depending on which survey you read. They totally rely on them for connecting with their friends, and they are cyber socializing. They're developing their personalities in a very different way, with much earlier access to a much wider range of material. And I think it's sort of incumbent on parents to think about that. And I guess one of the big things I've learned is that when I talk to my children about their day, I tend to focus on the offline world. I sort of say, what have you been doing today? And they'll talk about meeting a friend to kick a football round or whatever, right? I don't say, but the 3 hours you spent on Snapchat is a matter of interest, kind of, who were you talking to and what was the focus of your conversation? Were you talking about politics, or, was it just idle chit chat? And partly perhaps because we think that's prying in some way, but why don't we focus on the online part of the day in our conversations with our children?
Emer and Alex, does that sort of chime with your experiences and I suppose also your interactions with people in your parents' generations?
Yeah,
Yeah, definitely.
You can go first, Alex.
Oh, thank you. Okay, sorry. So when I have conversations with my parents, they don't know what I do at school, and they tend to always ask about what I do offline and all the things that I do, but most of the school is online anyway, and it's kind of makes there less to talk about and makes you feel that they're not as interested in like what you do at all. Just they're kind of stuck with what they did at school and just want to compare to that and not really actually know what you were doing at school.
Yeah, definitely. Bob, you said about how it's kind of changing. The life is different for young people than it ever was before, and I feel like we are the guinea pigs because no generation has ever been thrown into the deep end like this before. We don't know the consequences of this in 10 or 20 years because we've never been in a situation before. So it's definitely very worrying.
I think that's a really good point, and I think my generation is a bit prone to criticize your generation for its reliance on technology, the amount of time you spend, rather than recognize that you're actually pioneering a new situation that is not of your making, and probably not really in many ways of your choice. So I think parents need to wise up to that and adopt a slightly more, slightly different attitude to technology in that context.
Alex, I think
And Bob,
sorry, Emma, you go.
sorry, I'll just add to that. I do think that the reason for that, the reason why parents might be blaming children is because there's not enough awareness around it, because it's not treated like a proper problem like other things. And I think that's the reason why it's being put on to the young people.
One of the striking statistics, or two actually, that came out when I was researching the book. One is that 70% of parents are worried about how much time their children spend on screens. And I've learned through writing the book, it's not really about screen time, it's about what you're doing when you're on screen. So if you're educating yourself, if you're entertaining yourself, that's probably fine. It's some of the other, it's the sort of chill and scroll and some of the other stuff, gaming maybe, that we need to be a little more focused on. But the second statistic, which was quite striking, was 54% of Gen Z itself said that if their parents really knew what went on social media, they'd be a hell of a lot more worried than they actually are. And that one really struck me as being one to focus on.
You think you're worried now, just wait until you find out what we're really up to. That sort of thing. Yeah, wow, it's interesting. And Alex, you said something really interesting when we were speaking yesterday about how about adults, or people of our parents' generations, often sort of make a joke or make light of kids' kind of screen time. Talk about that.
They make little jokes and things about, oh, you're a teenager, you're Gen Z, you'll always be on your laptop, you can't live without Wi-Fi, you couldn't possibly go on holiday and not have your phone, you would die. Like all these little comments, they create a negative stigma surrounding electronic devices and kind of make Gen Z feel guilty when they use electronic devices, even though they can't really help it. They've grown up with it. They need it to function at school. They need it at home to communicate with their friends. And just with this negative image surrounding electronic devices and using it and the apps and social media just isn't really solving the problem. It just creates a guilt, and that doesn't help the Gen Z at all.
Bob, is that something that chimes with you? What you found out?
We have an expression in our house which I guess we shouldn't use, which is in the odd moment that one of us is not on their device and we walk into a room and everyone else is, and there are 4 people there, we'll say 3 out of 4 devices, like claiming that we're the hero because for 5 minutes we're the one not on the device. And I totally take the point. I think it's just maddening. I mean, just because you're on a device doesn't mean you're doing something bad. You might well be doing something really useful. And as you say, it's your primary means of communication. So why shouldn't you be? We just need to be more analytical about what we're doing online and be aware of some of the negatives. That's really the issue.
We should, probably confront the very obvious irony that we are all conducting a conversation online in 4 different locations, very convenient, very easy to set up. So obviously there is good screen time and bad screen time, and I think that point isn't really explored enough by the slightly lazy critics of screen time.
All screen time is not equal, and all users are not equal. So chill and scroll on social media can affect different personalities in different ways. And I do think we need to focus in on those who might be in any event prone to the negatives of social media, and those who are vulnerable already, and what impact it might have on them.
Mm-hmm.
So should we get into some of the harms that you do outline in your book? Because and I'm not sure I've actually said the name of your book, so I will say the name of your book, which is Born Digital: The Story of a Distracted Generation. And it's a very, very forensic and powerful kind of exposition of the range of concerns and harms and the evidence of those harms that are coming about through this kind of, well, as you said, Emer, this kind of unprecedented experiment on young people's minds. What were you surprised, or were you surprised at the breadth and the severity of tech's impacts on well-being once you started kind of unpicking it?
I was surprised about the breadth of harm. So starting with unhappiness, loneliness, anxiety, depression, and then ultimately through to self-harm and suicide. So I was surprised how serious some of these harms were and how widespread they seem to be. I was also, to be honest, a bit surprised that the academic evidence is not stronger in terms of proving causality between screen time, social media use, gaming, and these negative factors. So the truth is, as you know, the academic evidence is quite mixed on this subject. And so one of the things I call for at the end of the book, and this is very much based on what a lot of the UK charities that focus on adolescent digital well-being are saying, is we need a much closer relationship between the big tech companies, charities, civic society, academia, to really get to the bottom of where the harms are caused online, and to work together to try and prevent them. And that will involve, trials and tests and more data to prove exactly which harms are caused by being online. Because in parallel with these technologies becoming ubiquitous over a 10-year period, we've seen, broadly speaking, a doubling of most of the factors that I listed. And I simply don't believe that, whilst there may not be proven causality, that's a coincidence. So I do think we need to look at the evidence as to what might be causing it. And the other thing we can't ignore is that at the same time that all this technology has become ubiquitous, we have had some pretty major developing trends in society. So different forms of family, less nuclear family than perhaps we had when I was growing up. Decline in religion, decline in marriage. So again, all goes back to different family forms and the culture of the family. A big one for me was sleep loss. We'll come back to that later, I'm sure, but late night use of phones being highly prevalent amongst the young, not just the young, all of us, but particularly amongst the young, causing, what the World Health Organization called a sleep loss epidemic before we got to the current pandemic. And the reason that's a worry, of course, is that most long-term serious illnesses do have proven causality and strong links to deficient sleep. So if we have a sleep loss epidemic, then we probably are setting ourselves up to be ill later. I think it should scare all of us, but there's an even more basic dirty truth underlying social media, which is that bad news travels farther and faster on social media than it did in traditional media sources, and it is more engaging. It's just social media by design promulgates bad news because bad emotions are more engaging than positive ones. And if the objective of the surveillance or attention economy is to keep your eyeballs glued on a particular product or service, then negative emotions are more likely to do that than positive ones. That's just the way it works. So we shouldn't be too surprised that that's what the algorithms do, because it's driven by profit.
It has spread like wildfire. The exposure to all this stuff on social media, and it's particularly taken off probably in the last 5 years. But Bob, do you think it's been from the start of whenever Facebook came out in 2003, 2004, or has it really shut off within the last number of years?
I think it has got worse. And one of the interesting statistics that I read when researching the book was that under 5% of people in the world ever, throughout their entire life, actually experience personally a truly moral misdeed. But of course, with social media, as soon as any one of us experiences it, pretty much we all experience it, because there it is out there in the, being promulgated and spread around. So is that good? I don't think so.
Emer and Alex, are these kind of experiences, it sounds like they are, but are these experiences that you recognize among your peers, among your friends or yourselves? And obviously please don't feel under any pressure to share anything you're not comfortable with, but I'm just very aware that people of my generation, Bob's generation, are quite quick to say, oh, isn't it all awful? But actually, I'm not on TikTok, I'm not on Snapchat, I don't know what it's really like on those platforms. Is this chiming with you?
Yeah, so recently there was a lot of things surrounding sexual assault, and people thought people were finally talking about their experiences. And then there were false allegations, and things like this, they spread really fast through social media and through all these different things. And even if you're wrong, then that person will be affected and they can't turn back. And then this whole thing where people, they want to help, they share, they repost, they inform other people of things, but also people tend to just immediately believe what they read. They don't really do their research. They just think, okay, this is a post, it says something that could be plausible, I'll just tell everybody. And if it's wrong, then it's too late. Thousands of people know, and people are detrimentally affected.
Yeah, Ollie, I think that it is so relevant, and it's until I heard like people from yourselves saying these things, if you click into something that goes back to the database, and then you'll see more things like that. And it was until I heard that I could start seeing that, and I never realized it before. But it's whenever you hear it, you think this is actually happening. You never would have thought it would actually happen to you, but it's just the way it is. It happens to everyone. And as you say, it's the young people that are on all these apps, so they're exposed to it. But I think the reassuring thing is that there's people like yourselves, like Bob and Ollie, who care, because it's these people in the tech companies. They don't care about young people's well-being. They don't care about the self-harm and the damage that it causes. But it's this book is very, very reassuring to myself and to other young people, because it shows that it is a problem, and other people, adults do recognize it and they do care.
Emer, you said something really interesting earlier about it's clear that tech companies don't care. And I think that's what a lot of people feel. But Bob, did you talk to any of the platforms? Would they speak to you when you're writing a book, which is, clearly not saying the platforms are wonderful and we should all laud them?
I didn't have direct conversations or interviews with them, although I did read a lot of things said by them, both in their annual reports and their sort of public statements. And one of the interesting things I did was actually looked at who was on the board of Google and Facebook, for example. And if you just take Google for a minute, this is fascinating. The average age of the employees at Google is under 30. It's 29, I think, roughly. Really? The average age of the board of Google is 62. And the youngest person on the board of Google is 47. Now, you would think, would you not, a company that is so intermeshed, intertwined, and has this extraordinary relationship with the young, would have some representatives on its board that were younger. There is no Generation Z representative. There is no one, in fact, who isn't either a billionaire, a multi-something or other 100 millionaire, or in one case, there's a microbiologist academic. But where is the ex-media regulator? Where is the child psychologist? Where is the director of a trustee of a children's charity? This doesn't look to me like a company that wants challenge in relation to its relentless pursuit of profit. It looks to me like a company that is basically set on doing what it does and not finding a better balance between profit and societal good. And in the end, all these companies will come unstuck on that, because it's very clear to me that your generation, Alex and Emer, prefer to work for what I call purposes, not businesses. You have a strong sense of social purpose, and you want businesses not just to make money, but to do good things for society. And if they don't, you won't be working for them. So in the end, this will self-correct, but we need to push them to develop a better purpose than simply making money.
Very strong point.
Well, there's a quote in your book which I really loved, and it's by someone I'd not come across before, called Adam Alter. And his quote says, "The problem isn't that people lack willpower to stay off their devices, but rather there are 1,000 people on the other side of the screen whose job it is to break down the self-regulation you have." Which I think is a very concise and powerful way of expressing the thing I'm constantly sort of trying to say to people, which is like, I don't know if you've seen the film Good Will Hunting, but it's like, it's not your fault. It's not your fault. Do you think it may actually be one of their kind of greatest tricks, the tech companies' greatest tricks, that they've convinced so many of us that the opposite is true, that it is our own failing, it's our own lack of willpower that sees us using our phones too much or staying on Netflix too long.
Oh, you know, the recent documentary, The Social Dilemma, showed this so brilliantly. Basically, these devices and the products and services on them are designed to be addictive. They're designed to make us at least compulsive users. We can argue about the word addiction, which for some people has a very specific medical meaning, but they're certainly encouraged to make us use them more and more. Let's put it like that. And that uses, you know, a process in the brain called dopamine. It's very well understood, tried and tested. And as I think another great quote from, I think it was Roger McNamee, who wrote the book Zooked about Facebook. He said, you know, if you've got on one side of the screen one developing adolescent brain, and you've got on the other side of the screen 99 of the best of the world's best neuroscientists, it's not a fair fight, is it? And I agree with that. You know, it isn't. So first of all, we got to recognise that we are being lured into watching more and more by very cleverly designed processes that attack, you know, primeval and basic chemical instincts and processes in the brain. And once you know that, it may be easier then to deal with the issue.
And Emer and Alex, do you know, when you kind of recognise problems like too much time on your phone or tech overuse, either in yourself or in your peers, who do you blame at that point? Do you blame yourself? Do you blame parents? Do you blame the people making these products, or do you just sort of, or what? You know, what's your feeling about that?
I try to limit my exposure anyway, but if I do find myself getting sucked in and keep going, I don't realise the time's passing, I would blame myself because I'm physically there doing it. So that's why I would put it on to myself, even though I know there's a whole strategy behind it. I would still subconsciously feel like, oh, why did I just do that? So I put it on myself.
I agree. If I find myself spending too much time on my device and just procrastinating in general, I do blame myself. I don't think about the reason why I would still be stuck on my phone, the theories behind everything that would make me stay on my phone. I just think I don't have enough self-control and it's my fault and nobody else's.
And do you feel guilty about that then?
Definitely. You don't feel good after coming off the phone for sure. And compared to my friends, they'd be worse at it than I would, because like I'm reading your book and I'm trying to find out more information about it, about the issue, but not everyone is, and it's those people that don't realize the damage. So there's definitely a lot of guilt coming off it.
I think that's a really interesting thing that you say, because whilst I may have suspected that anxiety, depression, and worse was one of the causes of social media, I hadn't realized that just the basic unhappiness was one of the causes. And, you know, the Children's Society produced that excellent annual survey of children's happiness, and they believe that our youngsters today are the least happy they've been for 25 years, and that 15-year-olds in the UK are the least happy in Europe. We should be really examining why that is, and getting to the bottom of how much of that is caused by social media and addressing that issue, I believe.
Bob, the way you described Gen Z in your book was a generation of choice, a hopeful generation and an anxious generation. Why did you use those words to describe our generation?
Well, I think my generation is leaving you what I would call a not great hand of cards, if I can put it that way. So, you know, you've watched your parents dealing with the aftermath of the global financial crisis. We've delivered you a damaged planet. We're now lumping on you COVID debt. And running throughout the whole decade has been this global war on terror. So, you know, it's not like the world we would have designed, I think, to give to our children. And therefore, it's all the more remarkable that when I had these 200 interviews, that what I was seeing was enthusiasm, passion, excitement about the future, but with a sort of very mature reflection on the state of the world that you're inheriting, which probably drives this strong desire to do something about it. I think, you know, the one striking characteristic that ran through every conversation was that, you know, first of all, half the business ideas that were presented to me weren't really businesses. They were they were social enterprises. They had some main societal purpose, not just making money. So I do get this very strong sense from your generation of a recognition of the issues and an intention to leave your children a better planet in every respect. And I think that's very exciting, because that gives me hope that we will actually make some progress.
Brilliant.
That speaks quite closely to some other work the Global Action Plan is very involved in, around something which has a slightly techie name, or a weird name, called the values perception gap. But it's probably something you're aware of, Bob. It looks like you are.
I read it. Actually, this is the extrinsic intrinsic values proposition. Yeah, very good piece of work.
And so to just explain that, if I can briefly, it's this idea that we perceive ourselves to be people who value things like community and our family, and looking after other people and valuing the natural world. Most people, when asked, say that's how they describe themselves, and they're the values that they find important. But we perceive other people to have much more, what Bob rightly called extrinsic values, that everyone else cares about themselves, or cares about how they look, or cares about money, or all of these other things. And therefore we kind of feel like, well, even if I'm a good person, what's the point? Everyone else is just interested in furthering their own wants and desires, and that kind of leads to this stasis where nothing happens. And what we've been doing recently at Global Action Plan is looking at how that does or doesn't exist among young people. And really, it's fascinating. It does exist, but it only kicks in sort of teenage years. So younger children don't have that really negative view of everyone around them. We are actually all we're born very optimistic. We're born compassionate. We're born believing in other people. And there's something about our culture and the things that are prioritized and valued, that makes us think around that time, sort of 13, 14, it seems to kick in, that's when we start to believe that everyone else lacks compassion. And it's a crushing thing to realize in a way, but it's also I find it a very hopeful thing to start from that point of recognizing that we're good. Everyone's good. We're good people.
Well, I remember reading the report when I was writing the book, and the sentence that that stuck in my mind was the one that said, social media encourages the pursuit of junk values, meaning the intrinsic, the extrinsic, not the intrinsic goals. And I think it does. It's a constant peer group comparison of how good you look, who's got the best clothes, who's got the biggest car, who's on the nicest holiday. It's all totally unrealistic in terms of everybody's actual everyday life. So I totally gel with this concept of junk values. I think that was an excellent report that you wrote.
And do you, Emer and Alex, I'll stop asking you questions jointly at the moment, because it's impossible to know who's supposed to answer. So I'll start with Alex. Why not? Do you kind of experience that pressure to be perfect, to aspire to these perfect images of perfect lifestyles and extraordinary wealth and perfectly happy, smiling people? When you see that coming out of social media, or to be honest, a lot of other elements of culture, does that make you feel a pressure to sort of try and be like that?
I don't feel very much pressure to be perfect, because I know what I see on social media isn't the whole story. Like, it's only a fraction of somebody's life, because I'm lucky enough to have a school that educates us all the time. They constantly remind us that social media isn't the truth about somebody's life, and we shouldn't take it to heart, and everybody knows that. But in other places, in other institutions where they don't have this, where they don't get that education about the different things in the social media, how different things aren't real and how things are only a fraction of what's really happening, is just really worrying, because it could affect them. They start overthinking everything, thinking, oh, I need to have this, I need to do this. And I think it would be very good if all schools could have much more, shed more light on this problem, because right now there's not very much going on.
Emer, what about you?
Yeah, I probably subconsciously do, and I don't think that I'm taking it in. Like, you're looking at these pictures and you don't realize that you're actually taking that in. that's what you see every single day. But it's even the small things that people care about, how white somebody's teeth is, or stuff like that, that can stick with you. You don't realize that it does, but it does.
And I mean, I definitely don't think this is a problem just for young people as well. I mean, I try to, for this very reason, I try to kind of engage in social media less than I used to. But when I do, I'll see friends posting their sort of idyllic parenting scenes, and I've got 2 young kids myself, and I'm like, oh God, I'm a terrible dad. I have, my kids have just been screaming at me all morning. I'm a terrible dad. Look at these perfect family scenes. And I know it's not real. I know that that's, they just conveniently not filmed the bit where the child is screaming on the floor for absolutely no reason. But it again, it kind of makes me feel like I'm inferior. So it's not just a young person thing, I don't think.
I mean, you're the constant comparison of your average self or your worst self, which is what we tend to do, with everyone else's perfect self, leaves you in what I describe in the book as a state of near continuous failure. So it's no worry, it's no surprise that youngsters' self-esteem is affected. If every single thing you look at is basically better than you, that's just the way you're going to feel. It's human nature. As one of the interesting things is with the rise of influencer advertising budgets, that YouGov did a survey, and they asked people to look at the adverts and say whether they thought the influencers' views were authentic. And many people said they didn't think the influencers' views were authentic. In other words, they were sort of lying about the product or lying about their own life. And then they were asked, well, notwithstanding that, did you still take the recommendation? And they said yes. So we know influencers are just an extension of this unreal lifestyle, and yet we still are affected by what they recommend us.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk briefly about one of the things that really comes through strongly in the first half of your book, when we're looking at the kind of the harms and the concerns around the attention economy, and that's empathy, which is not a thing that you hear actually talked about all that much in terms of kind of tech concerns, but it seems like it's very much at the heart of things as you see it. So how is empathy being eroded by tech use, and what are the consequences of that?
Yeah, I read a couple of very striking books by a lady with the unlikely name of Sherry Turkle, who is a professor at MIT, who clearly has made the effect of technology on stunting empathy development one of her kind of absolute USPs. By the way, I read 35 books in the course of writing this book, which is why it's got 515 references in it. But and Adam Alter's that you mentioned, Irresistible, was one of the best, but Sherry Turkle's were 2 of the best. And I think that the point is this, that technology, whether intentionally or otherwise, systematically attacks the development of empathy. So let's take the parent and the baby in the pram, or maybe a toddler, 2-year-old sitting in a pram. In the old days, the parent would look at the child, pick up the child, there'd be eye-to-eye contact that was uninterrupted. And that's a very crucial part of parent-child bonding. It's more than necessary. It's actually part of growing up in a very basic way. Well, now imagine that the child has a tablet on their lap, or even worse, strapped to the side of the pram, which you see quite a lot in America. And the parent has their mobile device in their hand and is looking at a work email. So that face-to-face bonding between the child and the parent is systematically interrupted regularly by one or the other, or even worse, both. Okay. Roll that forward to a slightly older child. 42% of under 8s now have their own tablet. The parent almost certainly is going to have a smartphone around them. So that carries on through the process of the late single ages and then the young teens. So in the family environment, where you would normally be very much one-to-one, face-to-face, technology is interrupting that process, and that must have a big impact on empathy development. Because when you don't look at someone and get visual clues about their reaction, you don't know that you're saying something rude or offensive or difficult. When you do see someone wince, you immediately change tack, whereas if you're not getting that feedback. So later on then, kids who use these devices to communicate as their primary mechanism in what I call messaging, not talking, and that is the preferred mechanism of conversation in inverted commas for Generation Z. Interestingly, one of the surveys I saw asked Generation Z, if you had to remove one feature from your telephone, what would it be? And the biggest response was voice calling, which isn't that the ultimate irony? I mean, that's what the damn thing's for, right? And as Sherry Turkle said, brilliantly puts it, there's a sort of weird irony that the mobile telephone has actually cured us of talking. It stopped us talking to each other, not the opposite. Then you think about communal eating and the decline of communal eating. So, another place where empathy developed was sitting around a dining table and eating together. Well, the trend now to what I call food on the go, or running into a shop, grab and go food, or even if you are in a restaurant, it being a very limited service restaurant with a basic level where you simply grab and go and eat outside, probably while on your device at the same time. So that communal eating is, I'm afraid, declining. Then think about the workplace and this concept of what I call office pilot. So you go into a WeWork facility, you sit down in a booth, which is temporary for you that day. You put in your earbuds, you crack open 3 devices, and off you go. The 2 human beings you probably don't communicate with are the 2 sitting in the next booths, because they're doing the same as you. They're flying their booths just as you're flying yours as an office pilot. And when you come back the following day, the 2 people in the adjacent booths are 2 different people, because it's a hot desking facility. So the sense of community that you've got in an office environment that I had very strongly throughout my working career has changed too. So, I'm not saying this is a deliberate attempt by technology to interrupt empathy development, but it does. It just is a fact. And maybe that is why, we see a society that's arguably more polarized than at any time in my lifetime, because we are losing the ability to empathize with each other by this process of what we're now doing, looking at each other and sensing each other's reactions, being broken down by technology.
Which I guess is related to the bubbles that we all find ourselves filtered into in our social media worlds as well. And I'm definitely kind of struck by how sort of unused I am to actually being in a conversation with people who completely disagree with me, and that I don't really know how to handle that in the way that I think I used to. It's like I suppose
that's really fascinating. So one of the quotes that I remember from that section of the book was an Italian guy. He said, "I find it almost impossible to have a serious conversation about, a political subject with a friend at university, because when we sit down, the first 15 minutes, we have to argue about the facts, because he's seen different news from the news I've seen. So we're not starting from he's in his echo chamber, I'm in mine, he's in his filter bubble, I'm in mine. We're seeing different news, which maybe we didn't realize. So we can't even agree on the basic facts. If you can't agree on the facts, how can you have a sensible debate?" And that really struck me. I mean, I'm not sure I'd sort of realized that before.
Emer, is lockdown, and I'm searching for silver linings here because it's not been a brilliant 12 months, has it? But when I was thinking about empathy and reading the section of Bob's book about it, I thought, well, maybe the fact that we've all been stuck in our homes, and young people presumably for the most part stuck with their parents or their family units, maybe that's forced us to be a bit more empathetic and to kind of understand a bit more where our parents are coming from, and for them to understand where their children are coming from. Is that wishful thinking, or do you, looking back at the last 12 months, is that something that you think might be accurate?
I think a lot of people's different. During the lockdowns, I tried to get outside or go just wherever I could outside and not go on the phone all day, because if you're at home all day and you're on the phone all day, it's not going to end well. But some people probably were on their phones too much during the lockdown, and they didn't mean to be, but it was just happens, and you're on the phone and the times roll on and you don't realize that the time's rolling on. But I think that it did make some people more empathetic. I know in the first lockdown anyway, people were more understanding and empathetic. I think by the last one, it wasn't the same sort of energy around it. But yes, I do think that I think people value life a wee bit more now. I know where I live, people don't look at the material things as much. They pandemic has made them realize some of the more important things, even if it's by a little bit, they've realized a bit more, but it's still kind of give them a wee bit of a wake-up call and to the real world and the real world problems, and not the stupid problems that we think are the biggest things in the world, though they're really not. So yes, I do think it has made people more empathetic and compassionate.
Alex, what about you?
I think for me, it wasn't my parents being empathetic of my situation. It was more me being empathetic of them, because I know that their work is always on computers. They're constantly surrounded by like 5 million screens everywhere they look. And I never really experienced that. Sorry, background noise. Sorry. I didn't know what that would be like. And then now when I experienced the lockdown, I had to do online school. Then I realized what they were going through every single day when they went to work. And then I felt more like I appreciated what they did much more than I used to.
I mean, I think COVID's caused us to recalibrate our assessment of our relationship with technology in many, many ways. I mean, we had no choice but to use technology to connect with each other during COVID. So that's the first thing. And you know, the benefits of home delivery and the ease of home shopping and all the things that technology can do that are great in many ways, right? But I think we have noticed that we've spent even more time on screen. And I think probably a lot of people have realized that it's probably not doing them that much good. And we've seen the sleep loss issue that I referred to has actually, interestingly, gone up very substantially during COVID. The rate of prescription of sleeping pills went up 30% last year, 30%. Wow. Which is interesting because I actually slept better, I think. Because I wasn't getting up early to go into London. I didn't have commute time. But I think what a lot of people were doing was just spending time on their screens way into the small hours, which we know is a very regular problem, and it's very often when youngsters do talk to each other late at night and then in the early hours. So I think for some that has been a bigger issue.
We've just probably got time for a couple more questions. And I wanted to talk about a thing that you say in your book about how we should perceive the major tech platforms, because you know that Google and Facebook and Twitter, etc., should really be considered as advertising companies more than sort of tech companies. Why do you say that, and what are the implications of thinking about them like that?
Well, I think, again, The Social Dilemma on Netflix brilliantly demonstrated how these companies, what the business model underlying these companies is, which is they are vying for your attention. So broadly speaking, they can sell it to advertisers or anybody who'll pay for it. And once you understand that, it kind of helps you to understand some of the other issues we've been discussing. So that's why I think it's important. And I think, as I said, The Social Dilemma did that brilliantly.
And is that, Emer, is that a thing that kind of your generation recognize, talk about? Do you sort of see the kind of advertising imperative behind all of this, or is it not really a thing that's engaged with?
No, it is, and it's the exact same as again. I wouldn't have recognized it until somebody mentioned it, and then you start to see it. But definitely it is real, and you see it on a daily basis, and it's huge problem.
And you know this Oliver, because you're working on it, but I mean, I'm not sure I realized that advertising online was pretty much uncontrolled relative to, for example, TV and radio advertising. So I think the estimates I saw suggested that teenagers see 10 to 20 times more advertising when they're watching social media than they do when they're watching TV or listening to radio. And that's huge.
Yeah, it is huge, and it just seems to be completely challenged. It's not, as you mentioned, the rules that have grown up slowly and evolved around what is acceptable on telly and on the radio are well established, and we're used to them. And it would be weird to kind of see from an hour's TV content to see like half an hour or 40 minutes of advertising. I mean, probably the TV companies wouldn't get anyone watching their TV if that was the case. So I'm not sure it's purely based on kind of what's good for us and what's acceptable, and more towards, you know, what people would tolerate. But I find it extraordinary that there is no equivalent to kind of saying, okay, well, 7 minutes of an hour is a maximum that you can see ads for on telly. Why is there no equivalent for that online? Especially given
Well,
that
I think the answer is it goes back to where we started, which is this sleepwalking into what I call the distraction crisis. So I think the answer is that for a long time, the social media platforms were in the minority of our time and attention. You know, TV and radio and billboards and other, you know, traditional advertising, that's where it happened, right? But as these technologies have become more ubiquitous and we now spend as much time on social media as we do doing any of those other things, I think regulation will have to catch up, but it hasn't yet.
And you talk about sleepwalking into this crisis, which I think is a very good way of putting it. How would you compare the way we are, or would you compare the way we're sleepwalking into this to the way we've sleepwalked into previous crises, like the banking crash in 2008?
Yeah, so I mentioned in the book there's something called, if you're a private pilot, which I understand, there's a thing that can happen to you called spatial disorientation, which is a clever way of saying that the brain is quite good at detecting short, sharp changes in direction. It's not very good at detecting slow, gradual changes in direction. So, you know, what's similar about the climate crisis, the financial crisis, was there were very substantial changes over a prolonged period, but they didn't happen overnight. They happened over a 20 to 30-year period. And the brain just is less good at picking that up. So, and I think that's exactly what's happened here. Over 10 years, these technologies have quietly become bigger and bigger and bigger, and they're now enormously significant in our everyday lives. And the regulation has not kept pace because we've not really noticed the differences that and how that's affecting our lives. But I think we are at a tipping point now where more and more people are calling it out. More and more charities like yours are drawing attention to it. Regulators are worried about it. Parents are definitely very worried about it. Good news is even the young themselves are noticing it and starting to take action. So I think we are at a tipping point, and I think you will see change over the next 2 or 3 years.
And what about the people who don't think it's a problem? Yeah, like you must, or maybe you haven't, but I would have thought you've encountered at least some people who think, you know, the bottom line is that this is a brilliant way to make money. Monetizing human attention is genius. Like, what a way to make loads of cash. It employs lots of people. You know, get on with it. Have you encountered anyone with that sort of view?
Fascinatingly, I think this is maybe roughly the 20th event a bit like this I've done in the last couple of weeks. I have not had one event where anybody has really argued with the basic propositions in the book. No one has been saying, I mean, I've had questions like, well, is this really any different from television? At which point you make the point that, yeah, because the advertising rate is 10 to 20 times what it is on television. You know, I've had a question which you might well ask me in a minute, which isn't this just a bunch of old farts sort of going on about the way youngsters are different and it isn't like it used to be, right? To which I say, well, if you're talking about the stuff around the nuclear family, religion, I talk in the book about sexuality, a whole load of things have changed during my lifetime out of all proportion. There is a danger. It sounds like you're harping back to a better and greater time. That absolutely is not the way I'm approaching it. I'm simply pointing out things have changed. I'm not making any judgment in the book about whether they're better or worse, just noting they change because it's relevant to the effect of technology and the effect it has on you. So, but I haven't had anybody try to run that argument. Interestingly, I am going on an event next week where there is a Facebook, for the first time, there's actually a Facebook spokesman. In fact, it's the chairman of their chairwoman of their the new Facebook oversight board, which is responsible for their content moderation policy. So that is going to be fascinating. She's the ex-Danish prime minister, and I'm fascinated to see what line she takes.
Bob, I have just a question. So you say in your book, to my 3 children and the whole of Generation Z, in the hope that they will mount a revolution against harms from technology and create the future they deserve. Do you believe that this may be pushing the responsibility onto the youth because it's the wording they will mount a revolution instead of we? Some may take this as empowerment, but others take this as pressure. What do you think?
That's a really good question. And actually, if you'd said that to me before I'd gone nap on the bar, I'd probably have changed the wording. The truth, though, is that today, my generation has the levers of power. You know, we do speak to the Home Secretary. We sit on boards and committees that can affect the outcomes here in terms of regulation. So I kind of think it is us for now that's got to actually make this happen. But where I think your generation can be so useful is in mounting the campaign, recognizing yourself that we have an issue or issues. You know, we've seen so many brilliant Gen Z inspired and led campaigns over the last couple of years, whether it be, you know, Greta Thunberg or Black Lives Matter, or the anti-gun gun lobby protests in the States and elsewhere. Many youngsters motivated to get out on social media and campaign against those things, and use social media as the primary tool for spreading the message. So I think that's where we can ask your generation to help. Ultimately, it's probably still my generation for now that's actually got to, as I did this morning on Sky News, say to the GCMS secretary, you need to rethink and you need to put fraud in the online harms bill.
Brilliant, thank you.
Well, that leads us nicely on to I guess, the kind of $64 million question. How do we fix all of this? How do we very simply put all of this back in the box, get rid of all of these horrible online harms, and have an internet which is brilliant and fun and creative and safe, and enhances our lives? That's obviously an unfair question and ridiculous in scope. I mean, there must be some things which you think are more important than others, that need doing.
So I don't think there is one silver bullet. I think there's a whole range of things. Firstly, Generation Z itself realizing that there are issues and trying to the extent it's possible, given all of what we said about, you know, clever neuroscientists, be a little more self-disciplined. It is about parents engaging more with their children about their online world, explaining the concept of how their personalities are developed in an online world, so-called cyber socialization. It is about schools. Brilliant to hear from Alex that her school is doing this, but running courses in responsible internet use. I mean, we give our kids sex education. Why on earth is responsible internet use not part of the national curriculum? I mean, that to me is bonkers. And then, you know, we could hope that the big tech companies will, over time, think that they should find a better balance between making money and doing societal good. I'm afraid right this minute, I don't see much sign of that. I see lip service and what we call purpose washing. I don't see much reality to it, but I'm open to persuasion. And maybe if they put Alex and Emer on the board of Google and Facebook respectively, we'd see a slightly different, you know, we'd see more challenge to their corporate governance models, and we'd see some rapid change. But so I strongly recommend that they hire you immediately, the pair of you. So ultimately, I'm afraid we're left back with regulation. So we need more things like the Online Harms Bill, the Age Appropriate Design Code, the Digital Markets Unit, you know, and I've already mentioned responsible internet use education. And we need that to be global. And that means the UN, under the cover of the Sustainable Development Goals, needs to be pushing it globally to bring countries who haven't yet got there up to the standards of the best. We need investing institutions like the UNPRI to be putting pressure on the companies they invest in to adopt a wider and better purpose that support delivery of the Sustainable Development Goals. There isn't one silver bullet here, Ollie. This is a massive exercise, and it has to come from all these different places simultaneously.
Bob, you said global cooperation and global cooperation in your book. How important is cooperation and helping each other and doing it together? Is that governments or young people cooperating globally?
So this is a really interesting question, because of course, when you talk about the internet isn't a thing. The internet is actually millions of devices, computers, servers connected together in 220 countries in the world. And indeed, it isn't owned by anybody. It is owned, part of it is owned by private businesses who want to make profits. Part is owned by civic society. Part is owned by government who have their own objectives, which can be quite different around the world. So this is where the UN comes in. They have something called the Internet Governance Forum. It discusses regularly how to better govern the internet globally. Of course, the internet knows no national boundaries. And children's rights are absolutely at the top of their agenda. Interestingly, something called Clause 25 has just been recognized by the UN, which means basically that children's rights are identical online to their offline rights. And just that little clarification will definitely cause some countries to sit up and think about how the companies in their countries are serving children's needs, and ultimately the SDGs. So look, lots going on. That's a very complicated one. But definitely, if we can get the biggest countries in the world cooperating to improve protections on the internet for our children, that's got to be a good thing.
Yeah.
Alex, do you have any other final questions for Bob before I wrap up?
No.
I just
Emer?
sorry. Yeah. I've only got to start the book, but the language is amazing, and there's nothing better than reading a book where the language is captivating and interesting. And even the way you talk about technology, you described it as tsunami of technology, and then you humanize it by saying the internet, comparing it to the central nervous system. And I think that's something that young people would be interested in with it, like about reading this book, because it's not just all blunt, straight to the, like, it's not boring. There's a bit of creativity in it, and you can see like your passion for it shine through in the book. So I'm really excited to get into the nitty gritty of it.
Well, thank you very much. I think I should hire you as my PR agent. That sounded great.
That's two jobs for Emer that's come out of this so far.
She's already got a board, an NED at Facebook. Now she's going to work for me as well. Listen, Ollie, thank you so much for doing this. I think it is, you know how important this issue is, and your charity has undertaken some brilliant work, which I refer to both of your big reports in the book, which were both great pieces of work. So thank you for doing this. It's really important.
Well, thank you, Bob. Thank you for writing the book, and for doing such a forensic job in that book as well, because it is a huge issue. It's a thing which, the more you pull at it, the more you realize there is to learn. And I found it incredibly educational and motivating, and I really look forward to seeing how we can work together, how we can sort of campaign for some of these changes that we know are essential or important. What are you going to do next? You can do another one.
Documentary. I want to make a follow-up to The Social Dilemma that actually tells the story through the eyes of people like Emer and Alex. So the Social Dilemma was great, but it was basically a bunch of ex-tech executives. I want to hear it from Emer and Alex's perspective. So I'm going to try and focus on some youngsters who've had good and bad experiences of the internet. They've each had a good and bad experience, and hear the story through their eyes and what they would be doing about it.
Wonderful. Sounds great. And finally, for anyone who hasn't got a copy of the book yet, where would you like them to go and buy one?
If they want the profits to go to the Global Action Plan, or indeed any other UK-based adolescent wellbeing charity, they should buy it from the website for the book, which is www.robertwigley.uk. If they just want ease of purchase, but all the money to go to a big tech, they should buy it through Amazon, Kindle, or Audible. But I'll leave that to them if they're kind enough to buy the book.
Superb. Thank you so much, Bob, and best of luck with the book.
Thanks so much. Really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Emer.